Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Sarah sat in the back seat of the sleek black car, her mind racing, her heart beating faster with each passing second. The offer that Ethan had just made seemed impossible, unreal even. Marry him? For a contract? She had no idea what he meant by that, but the more she thought about it, the more intrigued she became. She had no idea who this man was or why he would want her involved in something like this, but there was something about him, something that pulled her in, even though she knew it was probably a bad idea. The car hummed steadily as they drove through the city, the rain still pouring down in torrents. Sarah's thoughts were a whirlwind, and she found it hard to focus on anything other than Ethan's words. He wasn't just asking her to marry him, he was offering her a way out of the life she felt trapped in. She had always dreamed of something more, but how could she even consider this? She barely knew the man, and yet, his calm, composed presence seemed to promise something she had never felt before: security, stability, maybe even freedom from the mundane existence she had been struggling with. Ethan pulled the car to a stop in front of her apartment building, the engine purring to a halt. Sarah's heart was still pounding as she turned to him. "So, what exactly are you asking me to do?" she asked, her voice shaky, though she didn't know why. Ethan's gaze was steady as he looked at her, his lips curling into a slight smile. "I'm asking you to marry me, Sarah," he said again, as if the words were simple, almost too simple. "It's a contract, nothing more. A mutually beneficial arrangement." Sarah blinked, trying to process what he was saying. "But, why me?" she asked, still unsure what his motives were. "Why would you want someone like me involved in something like this?" Ethan's eyes darkened slightly, and for a moment, she could have sworn there was a flicker of something personal behind them, something real. But it was gone just as quickly as it appeared. "Because, Sarah," he said, his voice lower now, "you're the perfect candidate for this. You're someone who needs a way out, someone who understands the stakes. I'm offering you an opportunity, not just for you to escape your current situation, but for both of us to benefit. This isn't just about me, it's about us." His words hung in the air, and Sarah's mind struggled to keep up. She felt like she was being pulled into something bigger than herself, but at the same time, she couldn't ignore the temptation. "What kind of arrangement are we talking about here?" she asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. "What do I get out of this?" Ethan paused, as if considering his words carefully. "I can give you everything you've ever wanted, Sarah. Money, status, opportunities you can't even imagine. You'll never have to worry about your future again. In return, all I need from you is your name on a piece of paper and a promise that we'll act as a couple when needed. No emotions, no love, just a simple business agreement." The simplicity of it all struck her. No emotions, no love, just a contract. It sounded too good to be true, and yet, she found herself considering it. She didn't have many options. She was stuck in a dead-end job, drowning in student loans, and struggling to make ends meet. This could be the escape she'd been hoping for, but it came with a catch, a big one. "And what happens if I say no?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Ethan's gaze remained steady, unwavering. "Then nothing changes. You go back to your life, and I go back to mine. But I'm offering you a way out. A chance to start over. All you have to do is say yes. Sarah sat in silence for a moment, her mind racing. She had always dreamed of something better, of a life where she wasn't constantly stressed, where she didn't feel like she was barely surviving. This could be her ticket to a new life, a life of comfort and security. But could she trust Ethan? Could she really go through with this? I need some time to think about it, she said finally, her voice quiet. Ethan nodded, not seeming surprised by her response. Take all the time you need. But remember, Sarah, opportunities like this don't come often. This could be your chance to change everything. Sarah stepped out of the car, her legs feeling shaky beneath her as she stood on the sidewalk. The rain was still falling, the world around her dimmed by the storm, but she felt as though she were standing at the edge of something new, something uncertain. As she made her way into the building, her mind was still whirling with the possibilities. Could she really do this? Could she really marry a stranger for a contract? She wasn't sure, but one thing was certain, this was the kind of opportunity she couldn't ignore. It might be crazy, but maybe, just maybe, it was the only chance she had to change her life forever. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a sense of uncertainty hanging over her. The rain had stopped, but the weight of Ethan's offer still lingered, filling her thoughts as she sat on the edge of her bed, staring out the window. She had never been one to make snap decisions. Her life had always been about following the rules, about playing it safe. But this was different. It was a choice that could change everything. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, snapping her out of her thoughts. She reached for it, half expecting a message from Ethan, but it was just a reminder from work. Another email about another meeting she didn't want to attend. She sighed, putting the phone down. The reminder only made the decision more difficult. She could stay in her current life, trapped in a dead-end job, struggling to make ends meet, or she could take a risk, step into a world completely unknown to her and accept Ethan's offer. She had always wanted something more, but the idea of tying her life to a stranger, even under the terms of a contract, felt overwhelming. As she got ready for the day, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan was offering her more than just financial security. There was something in his eyes, something in his calm, composed demeanor that suggested he wasn't just looking for a business arrangement. But what did he really want from her? Was this all part of some larger plan, or was he simply offering an escape for the both of them? She had no answers, but she couldn't ignore the pull, the nagging feeling that this might be her one shot at something bigger. By the time she finished her morning routine, Sarah's mind was made up. She couldn't waste time anymore. She needed to know more, and if she was going to go through with it, she needed to do it now. She grabbed her phone and texted Ethan. "I'll meet you. Let's talk more about this." "Where and when?" Within seconds, he replied, "I'll pick you up at noon. Be ready." The short message left no room for questions, but Sarah didn't mind. She needed clarity, and if he could provide it, then she was willing to take the next step. By noon, she was standing outside her apartment building, her heart racing. The black car pulled up, its engine purring as it stopped in front of her. Ethan was behind the wheel, his usual calm expression in place. As she got in, he didn't speak right away, and neither did she. The silence between them felt different now, tense, loaded with the weight of what was about to come. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "You've made your decision," he said, his voice steady, though there was a flicker of something else in his eyes. "I knew you would. You're not the kind of person who backs down from an opportunity like this." Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure if that was true. She wasn't a risk-taker by nature, but there was something about Ethan's certainty that made her second-guess everything she thought she knew about herself. They drove for a while, the streets of the city blurring past them, until they reached a sleek, modern building in the heart of downtown. It was tall, imposing, the kind of building that screamed success. Ethan parked the car and turned to her. "This is where we'll sign the contract," he said. "Once you agree, everything changes. Your life will be different. Better. You'll never have to worry about money again." Sarah swallowed, her nerves tightening. She had expected something like this, but now that she was here, standing at the threshold of a decision that could change everything, she felt the gravity of it all. She had to make a choice. She could walk away and go back to her old life, or she could step into a new one, a life that seemed too good to be true. She followed Ethan into the building, the lobby sleek and polished, the air heavy with the scent of luxury. They made their way to a private office, where a lawyer was waiting. The contract was already laid out on the table, its terms clear and precise. It was simple, really. A marriage of convenience. No emotions, no love, just a legal agreement. Sarah sat down across from Ethan, feeling the weight of the moment. "This is it," Ethan said, his tone almost casual. "All you have to do is sign. We'll go through the motions, and I'll take care of everything else." His words were straightforward, but Sarah couldn't help feeling a sense of unease. It all seemed too easy. Too perfect. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized she didn't have many options. The life she was living wasn't getting any easier, and this could be her way out. Ethan leaned back in his chair, watching her carefully. "Think about it, Sarah. A year from now, you won't recognize your life. You'll have everything you've ever dreamed of. Money. Power. A new identity." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "And in return, all I need from you is your name. A promise that will act like a couple when the situation calls for it." Sarah glanced at the contract again, her heart racing. She knew what she had to do. She had to take the leap, to trust that this would lead to something better. She could always back out later, right? She exhaled slowly, signing her name at the bottom of the page. The moment she did, she felt a strange shift in the air, like the world had just tilted beneath her feet. Ethan reached across the table and shook her hand, his expression unreadable. "Welcome to the new beginning, Sarah," he said, his voice low. "This is just the start." As they stood to leave the office, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stepped into a world she didn't fully understand. But one thing was certain, her life was about to change forever. The days after Sarah signed the contract passed in a blur. Her life, once filled with uncertainty and stress, now seemed to have a clear path laid before her. Ethan was true to his word. He kept his distance when necessary but always ensured that everything she needed was provided. Her apartment was upgraded to a luxury condo in one of the most desirable buildings in the city, and her bank account saw numbers she never imagined. Yet, despite the comfort, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped in a world she didn't fully understand. Every time she saw Ethan, he seemed more like a stranger, a distant figure who offered her everything but withheld something vital. Their interactions were cold, businesslike. He never asked about her feelings, her past, or her dreams. He was a man of few words, and those words were always carefully chosen. He never spoke of their contract in terms of emotions, only obligations. The first time they were required to attend a public event together was a gala for one of Ethan's business partners. Sarah had worn a dress she never thought she would own, let alone wear in public. Ethan had chosen it for her, of course. She was to be his perfect accessory, quiet, poised, and beautiful on his arm. As they entered the venue, she couldn't help but feel like a showpiece. The eyes of the room immediately turned toward them, but she was surprised to see how effortlessly Ethan played the part of the perfect, charming husband. He knew exactly how to greet people, how to smile, how to speak in a way that made everyone feel important. He was the center of attention, and Sarah was simply there to look the part. It was like stepping into a dream world, one that felt alien to her, but beautiful in its perfection. She tried to follow his lead, smiled when needed, laughed at the right moments, and stood quietly by his side. But despite the flawless exterior, something inside her stirred. This was all just a performance, and she was playing a role she wasn't sure she wanted to be in. At the end of the night, Ethan pulled her aside. His eyes, dark and unreadable as always, held her gaze for a moment longer than usual. "You did well," he said. "I hope you're starting to understand why this arrangement works." Sarah nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She had never felt so disconnected from herself. The more time she spent with Ethan, the more she realized just how little she truly knew about him. They were bound by a contract, nothing more. She had her role, and he had his. But the more she saw of his world, the more questions arose. What was he really like behind the polished exterior? And why was he so cold, so detached? The next few weeks passed in a similar pattern. Events, meetings, dinners, all part of the show. The more she saw Ethan in these settings, the more she felt like she was just a prop in his life. She was there to complete the picture, to show the world that he had the perfect wife. But she had no idea what he wanted from her beyond that. They rarely spoke outside of their public appearances, and when they did, it was always about logistics, about the next step in their arrangement. There was no warmth in his voice, no sign that he cared about her as a person. He was always distant, always focused on something else. Sarah couldn't understand it. She had signed up for this, yes, but she hadn't expected to feel so alone. She hadn't expected to lose herself in the process. As she sat in her luxurious new apartment one evening, staring out at the city skyline, Sarah felt a pang of longing. Longing for something real, something genuine. She had sacrificed her own dreams for this life, and yet it felt empty. She had everything she had ever wanted, money, a beautiful home, freedom from her old life, but none of it mattered. None of it felt real. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah began to question the choice she had made. She had agreed to this contract for a fresh start, but now she was unsure if she had truly gained anything. Every time she looked at Ethan, she saw the man who had made her a promise of a better life, but also the man who was nothing like the partner she had imagined. She felt more like a stranger in her own life than she had ever felt before. One night, after another exhausting event, Ethan dropped her off at her apartment. As he opened the door for her, his usual cold demeanor seemed even more distant than before. "Good night, Sarah," he said, the words falling flat. But this time, Sarah couldn't just let it go. She turned to him, her voice unsteady but determined. "Ethan, Is this really all there is to this? She asked, the question hanging in the air. Ethan looked at her, his expression unreadable, and for the first time in a long while, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Something that wasn't just business. Something that was almost human. He didn't answer her immediately. Instead, he took a deep breath and stepped closer. For a moment, Sarah wondered if he would say something that would change everything. But then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the moment passed. Ethan straightened, his mask back in place. "Good night, Sarah," he said again, his voice devoid of emotion. He closed the door gently behind him, leaving Sarah standing there, more confused than ever. What was going on inside his head? Was he capable of feeling anything for her, or was she truly just another piece in his calculated game? Sarah didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing: things were about to change. She had signed a contract, yes. But she hadn't signed up for this kind of emptiness. She needed to find out who Ethan really was, and what he truly wanted from her. The next few days felt like a blur to Sarah. She couldn't shake the conversation she had with Ethan that night, the way he had looked at her for just a moment, the flicker of something real in his eyes. But just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, replaced by the cold, calculated businessman she had come to know. She still didn't know what to make of it. Every time she tried to make sense of their arrangement, the distance between them seemed to grow wider. But Sarah couldn't stop wondering, what if there was more to Ethan than what she had seen so far? What if he was capable of real feelings, real connection, even if he refused to show them? She needed answers. She needed to understand him, to figure out if she was just a pawn in his game, or if there was something deeper beneath the surface. The next time she saw him, she decided she would ask the questions that had been haunting her for weeks. It wasn't just about the contract anymore. It was about them, about what this arrangement meant, about whether it could ever be more than just business. That night, after yet another event, Sarah found herself back in the luxury apartment she now called home. She was sitting in the living room, staring out at the city lights, when she heard the familiar sound of Ethan's car pulling up outside. Her heart skipped a beat. Was tonight going to be the night she finally got the answers she had been looking for? She stood up and walked to the door, taking a deep breath before opening it. Ethan was standing there, as composed as ever, but there was a slight tension in his posture that Sarah couldn't quite place. "Can we talk?" she asked before he could speak, her voice steady but with a hint of uncertainty. Ethan looked at her for a moment, his expression unreadable, before nodding and stepping inside. They made their way to the living room, where Sarah motioned for him to sit. She wasn't sure how to start, but she knew she couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. "I need to know what this is, Ethan," Sarah said, her voice more firm now, her eyes meeting his. "What are we really doing here? This arrangement, this contract. It's not just business, is it? I can't keep living in this limbo." Ethan's gaze softened just slightly, though his expression remained largely neutral. For a moment, he said nothing, just stared at her with those dark eyes that never seemed to give anything away. Then, he spoke. "You knew what this was from the beginning, Sarah. We made a deal, a simple business arrangement. You wanted out of your old life, and I needed a partner. That's it." Sarah shook her head. "I don't buy it. You're not telling me everything. You can't expect me to believe this is just about a contract. What do you want from me, Ethan? What is this really about?" Ethan's jaw tightened, and for the first time in a long while, Sarah saw a flicker of something vulnerable in his eyes. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but it was there. "I'm not a man who shares his personal life, Sarah," he said, his voice low. "I don't talk about my past, my feelings, or my reasons for doing things. But I didn't make this arrangement to hurt you. I did it because I needed someone who could understand the position I'm in. Someone who wouldn't ask questions, who wouldn't try to dig into my life. And you were the perfect choice. You were the one who needed a way out." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She had always known there was more to Ethan than what he showed on the surface, but hearing him admit it so directly felt like a punch to the gut. She had never imagined that his need for her had come from such a place of vulnerability. But at the same time, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, more that Ethan wasn't telling her. "I don't know what to believe anymore," Sarah said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know if I'm just a means to an end for you, or if there's something more between us." Ethan leaned forward, his gaze intense now, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're not just a means to an end, Sarah," he said, his words slow and deliberate. "You mean more to me than you realize." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what to say. The words were unexpected, and for a moment, she felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her. Ethan had never shown any sign of vulnerability before, never allowed her to see him as anything more than a business partner. But now, in this moment, he was letting her in. Or was he? Could she trust him? Was this just another carefully calculated move on his part? She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that there was something real between them, something that went beyond the contract. But how could she be sure? How could she know if Ethan was telling the truth or just playing another game? The silence between them stretched on, thick and heavy. Sarah's mind was racing, her heart caught between the desire for something real and the fear of being hurt again. Finally, she spoke. "Why do you keep pushing me away, Ethan? Why do you always keep me at arm's length if you say I mean something to you?" Ethan's eyes darkened again, and for a long moment, he didn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, almost regretful. "Because I'm afraid, Sarah," he said quietly. "Afraid of what? Would happen if I let myself feel something for you? If I let you in, if I let myself care." His voice trailed off, and Sarah could see the internal battle raging behind his eyes. He wasn't the man she thought he was. He wasn't the cold, detached businessman. He was someone who was just as vulnerable as she was, just as scared of getting hurt. It was the first time she saw Ethan for who he truly was. And maybe, just maybe, there was hope for them after all. The weight of Ethan's words hung in the air, thick with the tension of everything left unsaid. Sarah didn't know how to respond. She had come into this arrangement thinking it was just business, but now she saw Ethan in a new light. He wasn't the detached, cold businessman she had initially thought him to be. He was just like her, vulnerable, afraid of getting hurt, afraid of letting someone in. For the first time, Sarah could see the cracks in his facade, the fear that he had tried so hard to hide. Her heart ached for him, but at the same time, she was afraid. Afraid of what might happen if she let herself care too much, if she let herself fall for a man who clearly had so many walls built up around him. She couldn't be sure if this was just another game, another calculated move on his part, or if he was genuinely opening up. "I don't know what to say," Sarah said quietly, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can trust you, Ethan. I want to believe you, I really do, but everything about this feels uncertain. I don't know if I can keep pretending like nothing matters, like we're just a contract. Ethan's eyes softened, but there was still a sadness there, a heaviness that told Sarah he was struggling to hold it together. I understand, Sarah, he said, his voice rough. I never wanted to hurt you. I just didn't know how to make you understand what I was feeling. I've been so focused on protecting myself, protecting my life, that I forgot how to let anyone in. I pushed you away because I didn't know how to let you see the real me. But that doesn't mean I don't care. It doesn't mean I don't want something more with you. Sarah swallowed, the lump in her throat growing larger. She wanted to believe him, but there was still so much she didn't understand. Was this just the result of months of pretending? Or was it something real, something worth taking a chance on? She knew she had to make a choice. She couldn't keep living in this limbo, caught between the life she had built for herself and the possibility of something more with Ethan. But could she trust him? Could she trust herself to open up to him, to let herself be vulnerable again? I don't know if I'm ready to take that step, Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared, Ethan. I'm scared of what might happen if I let myself care too much. I don't want to get hurt again. Ethan's face softened with understanding. He stepped closer to her, his gaze never leaving hers. I'm scared too, Sarah, he said, his voice low. I'm scared of losing you, scared of ruining this. But I'm willing to take that risk if you are. For a moment, they stood in silence, just looking at each other, the weight of their words settling in the space between them. Sarah's heart raced in her chest, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. This wasn't supposed to be a fairy tale. It was supposed to be a simple contract, a business arrangement with no strings attached. But somewhere along the way, things had changed. She had changed. And now, she had to decide if she was willing to take a leap of faith, if she was willing to risk everything for something that could be real. What if it doesn't work? Sarah finally asked, her voice shaky. What if we can't make it work? What if this is all just too complicated? Ethan reached out, gently taking her hand in his. His touch was warm, grounding, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a sense of calm. Then we'll figure it out together, he said simply. I'm not asking you to make any promises, Sarah. I'm just asking you to take the next step with me. We don't have to have all the answers right now. We just have to be willing to try. Sarah looked at him, her heart in turmoil. Could she really let herself trust him? Could she step out of the safe, familiar life she had built and step into the unknown with someone who still had so many walls up? She didn't know the answer. But as she looked into Ethan's eyes, she realized something. She didn't have to have all the answers. She didn't need to know exactly what would happen next. All she had to do was take that first step, trust that she wasn't alone in this. That maybe, just maybe, they could figure it out together. With a deep breath, Sarah nodded. Okay, she said softly. I'm willing to try. Let's take the next step, together. Ethan's face broke into the smallest of smiles, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she was seeing the real Ethan. The man who had been hiding behind the walls he had built up for so long. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. Something real. But as Sarah looked up at Ethan, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of their journey. There was so much they still had to face, so many things left unsaid. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid to find out what came next. The days that followed were a strange mix of uncertainty and hope. Sarah had agreed to take the next step with Ethan, but she still didn't know exactly what that meant. Every time they were together, the air between them felt charged, like they were both standing on the edge of something big, something life-changing. But neither of them knew where that edge would lead. They had decided to move forward, but the path ahead wasn't clear. Ethan, for his part, seemed to have let down some of his walls. He was still distant at times, still guarded, but Sarah could see the flickers of something more in his eyes, something real. He didn't hide it as much, didn't retreat behind his usual mask of control. Yet, every time she tried to get closer, to learn more about him, he pulled back, as if afraid to show too much. Sarah wasn't sure if he was doing this to protect her or himself, but it only made her more determined to break through the barriers he had built. It wasn't just about the contract anymore. She had signed up for more than just a partnership. She had agreed to open herself up to him, to take a risk. And now, she was determined to make it work. But it wasn't easy. There were moments when Sarah felt like she was losing herself in this new life, in the world that Ethan had created for them. The luxury, the events, the constant public appearances, they all felt like a performance. She wasn't sure who she was anymore, or who Ethan was either. They had become so caught up in the roles they were playing that it was hard to tell where the act ended and reality began. One evening, after another high-profile dinner event, Sarah was sitting alone in the quiet of her apartment, trying to make sense of everything. Ethan had dropped her off earlier, his usual cold demeanor firmly in place. He had said barely a word as he let her inside, and it left Sarah wondering if she was still just another accessory in his perfect world. The silence in the apartment was deafening, and Sarah felt the weight of everything pressing down on her. She had agreed to this life, but now she wasn't so sure it was what she wanted. She had come so far, but it still didn't feel like enough. She needed to know what Ethan felt, what he wanted. She needed to know if they had something real between them or if this was just a game to him. Sarah had spent too many nights lying awake, trying to figure out the answers, trying to convince herself that this was more than just a business arrangement. And tonight, she couldn't keep quiet anymore. She needed to talk to him, to ask the questions that had been eating away at her. The sound of Ethan's car pulling into the driveway broke her out of her thoughts. Her heart skipped a beat, and without thinking, she grabbed her phone and sent him a text, "We need to talk." She wasn't sure if he would come, if he would want to talk, but she needed to try. Within minutes, her phone buzzed with a response, "I'll be there soon." The message was short, but it was enough to give her some hope. When Ethan arrived, he didn't say anything at first, just walked into the apartment and stood there, looking at her with those unreadable eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if the silence between them was waiting for something that needed to be said, but neither of them knew how to begin. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "Ethan, what is this?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly, but her resolve clear. "What are we doing here? Are we just pretending? Or is there something real between us?" Ethan sighed, rubbing a hand over his face as if he were trying to gather his thoughts. He seemed tired, more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. "Sarah," he began, his voice low, "I don't know how to answer that. I've spent so long keeping people at arm's length that I don't even know how to let someone in. But I'm not pretending with you. Not anymore. I don't know what this is exactly, but it's not just business. It's not just a contract." Sarah took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. This was the moment. The moment she had been waiting for, the moment she had been hoping for. "Then what is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan stepped closer to her, his expression softening for the first time in a long while. "I don't have all the answers," he said, his voice quiet. "But I know one thing for sure, I care about you, Sarah. I care about what happens next. And I'm willing to try." The words hung in the air between them, a promise, an unspoken understanding. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like maybe, just maybe, they were on the same page. She could feel the weight of the decision they were about to make, whether to move forward and take the leap into the unknown, or walk away from everything they had built. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. Ethan wasn't perfect, and neither was she. But maybe, just maybe, they could figure this out together. The weeks that followed were filled with a strange sense of clarity and confusion all at once. Ethan and Sarah had taken that first step, the one they had both been so afraid of, and now they were slowly finding their way forward. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it felt real. For the first time since their arrangement had started, Sarah felt like she wasn't just playing a part in a game. There were moments when they would share a quiet dinner at home, no cameras, no public events, just the two of them, and she could see a side of Ethan she had never seen before. He wasn't the cold, distant businessman she had first met. He wasn't even the guarded man who had offered her a contract all those months ago. In those moments, he was just Ethan, vulnerable, unsure, but trying. And Sarah found herself responding to that, to him. She would catch him looking at her in ways that made her heart flutter, like there was something more than just a business arrangement between them, something deeper. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something. The walls between them were slowly crumbling, brick by brick, and Sarah felt herself opening up in ways she hadn't imagined possible. But even as they grew closer, doubts still lingered in the back of Sarah's mind. Was this real? Was she only falling for the idea of Ethan, the man who had given her everything she had ever wanted? Or was there something more? It was a question that kept her awake at night, as she lay in the quiet of their shared bed, her mind racing with thoughts of what the future would hold. There were still moments when Ethan would retreat back into his old self, the man who kept his emotions locked away, who wouldn't let anyone in too far. And every time he did, a small part of Sarah pulled away. She wanted to believe that this was more than just a contract, more than just two people faking a life together. But she didn't know if she could trust him completely, not yet. One evening, after another long day of meetings and events, Ethan invited her out to dinner. It was a rare moment when they had some time to themselves, away from the constant public scrutiny. They went to a quiet restaurant, tucked away from the busy streets, and for the first time in a while, they were able to relax. Ethan was different tonight, looser, more at ease, and it made Sarah feel more comfortable than she had in weeks. As they sat across from each other, talking about everything and nothing, Sarah realized how much she had come to care for him. He was no longer just the man who had saved her from a life she felt trapped in. He was someone she had grown to trust, someone she could see herself with, maybe even someone she could love. But as the evening wore on, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Ethan was still holding back, still not completely letting her in. And it hurt. She wanted him to be as open with her as she was trying to be with him. She needed him to show her that this wasn't just about the contract, that it was about them. After dessert, as they stood outside the restaurant, the cool night air wrapping around them, Sarah made up her mind. She couldn't keep wondering what was going on inside Ethan's head. She needed to know. "Ethan," she began, her voice steady but with a hint of vulnerability, "I can't keep doing this, pretending like everything is fine when it's not. I need to know where we stand. Are we just going through the motions? Or is this real?" Ethan's face softened at her words, and for a moment, he didn't speak. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable. Sarah held her breath, waiting for him to say something, anything. Finally, he stepped closer, his voice low and earnest. "Sarah, this is real. I can't promise you everything, and I can't be who you want me to be overnight. But I'm trying. I'm here, and I'm willing to be open, to let you in. I need time. I need to figure this out, but I want to do it with you." His words hit her like a wave, both a relief and a challenge. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, but the fear was still there, fear of failure, fear of being vulnerable. "I'm not asking for perfection, Ethan," Sarah replied softly. "I just want to know that we're in this together. I don't want to feel like I'm still just an accessory in your life, like I'm still just playing a role." Ethan reached out and took her hand in his, the warmth of his touch grounding her. "You're not just an accessory, Sarah. You never were. I may not have known how to say it before, but I'm starting to see what this is, what we are. I just need you to be patient with me. I'll get there. I promise." The words hung in the air, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt the weight of their truth. Maybe they weren't there yet, but for the first time, she felt like they were on the same path. And that was enough, for now. The weeks that followed felt like a new beginning for both Sarah and Ethan. The walls between them, though still present, had begun to crack, and with every passing day, they moved closer to something that felt real. They spent more time together outside the spotlight, in the quiet moments where they could truly be themselves, free from the expectations and the role they had both been playing. There were no cameras, no obligations, just Sarah and Ethan, learning to navigate the complexities of their unconventional arrangement. They had agreed to try, and every day they took one more step forward. It wasn't always easy, and there were moments when old habits crept back in, when Ethan pulled away, when Sarah doubted if this was truly what she wanted. But they kept going, because they both understood now that real relationships weren't built on perfection. They were built on trust, on vulnerability, and on the willingness to be open with each other, even when it was hard. Ethan had his moments of doubt, of course. There were times when Sarah could see the fear in his eyes, the hesitation in his voice. But she had learned to be patient, to give him the space he needed, while also making sure that he knew she was there, ready to take the next step with him. And slowly, but surely, Ethan began to trust her more, to let her in ways he hadn't before. They started talking about things that went beyond the surface, their hopes, their fears, their pasts. For the first time, Sarah felt like she was truly getting to know the man behind the cold, distant exterior. He wasn't perfect, but he was real, and that was enough for her. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony of their apartment, watching the city lights flicker below them, Ethan turned to her with a softness in his eyes that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. "I don't know what the future holds, Sarah," he said quietly, his voice sincere. "But I know that I want to face it with you. I don't have all the answers, but I'm not afraid anymore. I'm ready to be with you, for real. No more pretending." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was the first time he had spoken so openly, so honestly. She had spent so many months questioning whether this was real, whether he truly cared about her, or if she was just a means to an end. But now, in this moment, she knew the truth. Ethan wasn't perfect, but he was willing to try. He was willing to take a chance on them, on their future together. And that was enough. Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "I'm ready to, Ethan," she said softly, her voice filled with a quiet certainty. "I don't need everything to be perfect. I just need to know that we're in this together. And I believe we are." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was a shared moment of understanding, of two people who had both taken risks and found something real in each other. In that moment, Sarah knew that the future wasn't going to be easy. There would still be challenges, still be moments of doubt and fear. But with Ethan by her side, she felt like they could face anything. They weren't just bound by a contract anymore. They were bound by something deeper, something real. And that was all that mattered. As the night stretched on and the stars above began to shine brighter, Sarah knew that their journey together had only just begun. They had both taken the leap, and though they couldn't see exactly where the path would lead, they were ready to walk it together. And that was enough for now.